Imagine standing near a wild campfire. Welcome to the year 50,000 BC. Daylight fades into absolute black. You have no digital screens. You have no endless emails causing you panic. There is only your body, the brutal heat, and a dark cloud of lung-burning ash blowing straight into your stinging eyes. At some specific moment in the past, an early ancestor stared at that gray fog. They asked a bizarre question. They wanted to breathe it in on purpose. This video explores the true origin of smoking. Forget about factory cigarettes. Forget about rolled cigars. Forget the annoying coworker dragging out forced conversations near the office parking lot. We are looking at the exact second a person deliberately chose to swallow fire. This choice represents a massive piece of our shared Stone Age hardware. The truth shocks people. Your craving for smoke never began with tobacco plants. Early farmers did not invent it. Tribal ceremonies did not invent it. Colonial trade ships did not bring it across the ocean. That primal urge serves as a biological blueprint buried deep inside your bones. It existed long before humans ever built a single civilized city. The actual proof behind this wild claim will blow your mind. Look at the flames. Before you smoke, you need fire. Fire ties the entire human timeline together. 1 million years ago, Wonderwork Cave in South Africa held a massive secret. Scientists dug up burnt plant ash and scorched bone. Wild lightning did not start this. A deliberate, controlled burn created those crackling sparks inside dark stone walls. We were not Homo sapiens back then. We were Homo erectus. Picture a heavy-browed cousin with a thick skull and zero desire to take orders. They survived the freezing dirt by guarding the flames. They roasted meat. They fought off the brutal cold. They packed tightly together, and they swallowed thick smoke. Every single day, for hundreds of thousands of years, our ancient ancestors breathed ash. It blanketed them completely. They had absolutely no choice. Then the chemistry shifted. Burning random weeds creates much more than carbon gas and water vapor. Toss the wrong leaves into the fire pit, and you unleash a chemical storm. Specific plants burn and release mind-altering compounds. Alkaloids, terpenes. Invisible molecules strike the nervous system. Sitting near the fire, a tired hunter accidentally breathed in a dizzy warmth. They got incredibly high. They had zero clue why their bodies suddenly felt electric. This is straight science. Experts know these early wanderers lived inside dense forests across Africa, Europe, and Asia. They constantly breathed the smoke of wild cannabis, native tobacco, and potent hallucinogens. Inside the human skull, your brain has tiny sensors. They act like a lock waiting for a key. These locks regulate your mood, your hunger, and your memory. They did not evolve just to catch cannabis smoke. But when that first wave hit those sensors, the brain recognized it instantly. It embraced the strange chemical. That single breath ignited human history. It was no grand strategy. A weary hunter simply relaxed downwind from a burning bush and experienced a wildly good night. They chased that feeling. A global empire built on trillions of dollars. Ancient shamanic chants and sacred medical rituals all trace back to that one beautiful accident. We must separate random bushfires from intentional farming. Finding wild weeds burning is one thing. Planting crops specifically to harvest their mind-altering smoke is a massive evolutionary leap. Look at the hard dirt. What does the actual digging reveal? The oldest physical proof of humans actively inhaling burned cannabis drops us into the freezing Pamir Mountains of Central Asia. The exact date hits right at 500 BC. Diggers tore open an ancient burial mound. They pulled up charred wooden bowls. Inside those bowls, they found glowing white stones. Those rocks had been shoved into raging fires until they screamed with heat, then stacked beside heavy plant residue packed with massive levels of THC. Nobody grew this specific crop to weave thick ropes or chew bland seeds. They grew the absolute strongest variant available. They buried their dead with it in deeply sacred rituals, specifically dating back to 500 BC. Stop right there. Let that date sink in. That is a full 25 centuries ago. But an aggressive question should be clawing at the back of your mind right now. Does a lack of older physical proof prove that older humans never smoked? Or does it simply mean the ground swallowed the clues? Think about what you burn. Seeds, crushed leaves, and brittle plant stems turn into dust in the wind. They almost never survive thousands of years buried in wet soil. We drag sharp stone axes out of the dirt from 3 million years ago because solid rock refuses to die. It is indestructible, but a carved wooden pipe stuffed with dry herbs that rots away in a few brutal centuries. A bag made of rotting leather melts completely back into the black earth long before any modern scientist arrives with a shiny brush. Therefore, empty dirt proves absolutely nothing. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus recorded something wild in the 5th century BC. He watched the Scythians. They were brutal nomads riding across the Eurasian steppe. He documented their intense vapor baths. They built tight, sweat-soaked tents. They smashed glowing rocks inside. They threw heavy hemp seeds directly onto the blistering heat. Sitting trapped inside that thick fog, they breathed deep. Herodotus claimed they possessed howling lungs. They screamed with pure joy. Modern scholars laughed. They called him a dramatic liar. They assumed he misunderstood the bizarre ritual. Then diggers ripped open actual Scythian graves. They found heavy bronze bowls. They found scorched rocks. They found thick hemp ash. Herodotus never lied. He told the absolute brutal truth. He actually played it safe. Now consider tobacco. Most people link smoking exclusively to this single plant. Native to the deep Americas, it belongs to the Nicotiana family. This geographical isolation changes everything. The entire Old World remained totally blind to it. Europe, Africa, and Asia knew absolutely nothing about it before the late 15th century. Giant ships hit the Caribbean dirt in 1492. European sailors stepped off the wooden boats and froze. They watched indigenous locals performing what looked like alien magic. Columbus documented this exact visual shock. He saw men and women casually holding burning twigs. They sucked thick fog from crushed dried leaves. They pushed gray clouds out of their noses. The bearded sailors stood completely paralyzed. Then, a few weeks later, they stole the habit. They copied the locals. They wanted the smoke. Native Americans burned this leaf long before European boots ever touched the sand. Scientists scraped ancient clay pipes in the American Southeast. They found hard chemical residue. This proof shows humans deliberately inhaled this specific holy ash 35 centuries ago. Deep in the humid Amazon basin, dirt-covered farmers likely bred these wild roots 10,000 years back. Ancient tribes never sparked a flame just to kill time. They treated the burning leaf as absolute law. It was purely sacred. They burned it to heal sick flesh. They used it to seal bloody peace treaties. Breathing ghostly breath onto a rival warrior acted as a profound physical blessing. They threw an invisible rope to the sky. A painted shaman sucking hot ash was never taking a quick smoke break. He ripped open a brutal tear between breathing men and silent gods. That gray fog actually lived. It crawled upward, carrying desperate human prayers. It crashed downward, dragging heavy holy visions. This deep discipline completely changes the historical perspective. Tribes locked this ritual behind severe tribal laws for thousands of years. You show absolute terror and raw respect to the divine, rushing through a cheap cigarette while shivering at a dirty concrete bus stop, mindlessly sucking dead smoke while staring at a glowing screen on your lunch break. Modern society completely manufactured that hollow daily routine. Greedy European colonizers aggressively stripped the soul from the plant. They deliberately mass-produced the casual habit. The ancients demanded absolute reverence. Let us dig even deeper. Modern scholars hiding in dusty labs missed the absolute oldest clue. In 2019, diggers ripped open the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah. They uncovered a freezing 12,000-year-old fire pit. It held a massive secret. They found concentrated seeds of wild North American tobacco. The wind did not blow them there. Human hands deliberately dumped them into the roaring heat. This single dead fire predates carved pipes by thousands of years. It completely shatters the historical timeline. It forces a massive question. If ancient Americans threw powerful weeds into boiling flames 12 millennia ago, what did the rest of the planet burn? Humans hunted everywhere. They tracked beasts across Africa, Asia, Europe, and Australia. Starving minds crave altered states. It represents a global human obsession. A radical scientific idea explains this raw desperation. It involves a biological hunger. Across every bleeding culture ever tracked, humans brutally hunted for escapes. They guzzled fermented rotting fruit. They swallowed glowing psychedelic mushrooms. They sucked gray smoke. They chewed bitter leaves. They crushed hard seeds. This relentless hunt never stopped. Ronald Siegel, a sharp mind at UCLA, pushed this brutal truth. He classified intoxication as the absolute fourth drive. It stands equal beside raw hunger, burning thirst, and pure sex. This stone-cold survival trait infects staggering beasts too. Wild elephants actively crush fermented fruit. Freezing reindeer in Siberia hunt toxic mushrooms. They deliberately drink the warm yellow urine of their herd to recycle the active chemicals. Honestly, massive respect for that. That is brutal animal logic. If this hungry drive runs that deep inside living flesh, the truth becomes obvious. Long before baked clay pots, long before shaped wooden pipes, ancient tribes deliberately chased psychoactive clouds. They needed the chemical escape. Early humans intentionally grabbed wild plants during quiet rituals. They deliberately built heavy campsites right next to specific bushes. They wanted that exact leaf. They tested unknown chemical clouds. Some gray fog made their starving brains float. Other thick clouds made them violently sick. Tasting death was the ultimate price. That was blind swallowing. Prehistoric science was pure trial and error. One simple mistake stopped your beating heart. It was occasionally literally fatal. But the tough survivors remembered everything. They whispered the deadly secrets to their children. They passed these brutal rules down through living flesh. Written ink did not exist. They had no vast stone libraries. They had no bright formal schools. They only had spoken warnings passed mouth to ear around a roaring fire in the absolute dark. People completely ignore a massive piece of this puzzle today. Smoke acted as raw medicine. Way before casual daily habits formed. Way before holy spiritual rituals started. Sick humans breathed ash to survive. Look down at your own chest. Your lungs work as a perfect chemical sponge. Pushing raw plant chemicals down that fleshy tube actually makes brutal logic. Modern doctors still use this exact trick. They give sick people plastic asthma inhalers. They pump freezing anesthetic gases. They use wet nebulizers. That direct, lung-scrubbing air survived the brutal test of time. We simply removed the open flames. Ancient doctors figured this mechanism out fast. In 1550 BC, ancient Egypt recorded the famous Ebers Papyrus. This heavy medical scroll is incredibly old. It documented a wildly bizarre treatment. Men with wet hacking coughs and rotting throats deliberately inhaled hot herbal ash. Curing broken lungs with thick smoke sounds completely insane today. You think Egyptians cured chest pain with actual fire? Yes, they absolutely did. They burned raw henbane and strong-smelling spices. Those specific weeds actually hold real active drugs inside their leaves. The ancient Greeks loved this therapeutic smoke. Hippocrates built the absolute foundation of modern medicine. Every single modern doctor takes a strict oath named directly after this man. He actively ordered sick patients to suck hot vapors deep into their sick chests. Delivering medicine straight to the lungs made perfect sense back then. The lungs provide instant access to the bloodstream. They desperately needed that raw hit. Ancient Indian Ayurvedic medicine recorded this brutal truth 3,000 years ago. They called it dhumapana. It literally translates to drinking smoke. Sick patients sucked specific medicinal weeds through heavy pipes. They treated specific body pain with specific crushed leaves. They never guessed or improvised. They followed a highly specific, totally refined chemical system. Ancient China did it. Ancient Mesopotamia did it. Early civilizations across the entire bleeding globe deliberately inhaled hot plant vapor. They never chased a cheap addiction. They never tried to look cool. They did it because the raw chemical heat actually worked. It healed their broken bodies. Or at least it worked enough times to keep them alive. In a brutal prehistoric world lacking sharp steel scalpels or modern chemical antibiotics, a dirty leaf that works sometimes sets a massive survival standard. But survival required another critical tool. Modern history completely ignores the heavy blood glue holding early tribes together. Early humans lived entirely as pack animals. Wandering the dark wilderness alone guaranteed a violent death. Sticking together meant staying alive. A shivering tribe needed absolute trust to survive the long, cold nights. Any shared habit that locked their minds together carried immense evolutionary value. Swallowing mind-altering chemicals together served as the ultimate bonding tool. Sharing a heavy chemical trip forces multiple brains to start beating as one heart. It builds an invisible, unbreakable shield of mutual trust. Modern brain scanners actually prove this. Scientists watch raw neural activity synchronize perfectly inside shared rituals. Deep group identity solidifies instantly. When freezing hunters huddled inside tight dirt walls breathing heavy cannabis clouds, they never threw a casual party. They built thick smoke walls. They locked eyes in the fog. That chemical cloud acted as raw social technology. They forged the deep, savage trust required to hunt giant predators and actually return alive. The ancient smoke circle was pure survival infrastructure. History took a brutal turn. Trading sacred smoke for a daily addiction created an absolute global disaster. Tobacco hit European dirt in the 16th century. It infected the population instantly. The plant transformed from a bizarre foreign weed into a rapid continental virus. By the 1600s, merchant ships hauled the dry leaves globally. By the 1700s, greedy aristocrats violently sniffed crushed powder up their wealthy noses. By the 1800s, thick cigars stuffed the mouths of the elite. By the 1900s, ruthless factory bosses unleashed the modern cigarette. They built massive cash-bleeding machines. They mass-produced cheap paper tubes of poison. They engineered absolute biological addiction. Native tribes spent millennia perfectly balancing a measured, holy ritual. Greedy European industrialists brutally stripped that sacred soul in just 4 centuries. The 20th century tobacco empire spent billions of cold hard coins hiding pure cancer data. Their own lab scientists held the bloody proof. They ignored the hollowed lungs. They violently targeted young children with bright cartoons. They paid smiling doctors to lie. They injected raw chemicals to force nicotine strikes faster into the human brain. They designed a rapid withdrawal crash to guarantee repeat buyers. They weaponized an ancient communal bond into a mathematically perfect killing mechanism. An ancient painted shaman and a modern executive wearing a sharp suit touched the exact same green leaf. They shared zero common ground. A holy man burned sacred weeds on hot burial stones. A rich boss signed documents selling fatal addiction to teenagers. They both used thick smoke. Every single other detail represents a sickening moral failure. When did ancient humans take that very first deliberate hit? The honest truth remains buried forever. Hard physical proof drags us safely back 12 millennia. Smart logic pushes that timeline aggressively deeper into the dark. That raw biological hunger to bend reality, to share deep chemical rituals, to suck hot medicine deep into the chest, completely outlives any carved stone we dig up. That desperate drive likely sparked the moment we tamed the first flame. It matches the exact cognitive explosion that separated walking apes from thinking men. We linked a brutal cause to a clear effect. A weary brain stared at a burning bush and connected the dots. They remembered feeling a bizarre rush last time. They deliberately chased that exact rush again. We call that raw survival intelligence. It is definitely not a cheap modern addiction. Here is the absolute brutal reality. This craving is incredibly ancient. It heavily predates the first planted wheat. It predates baked clay. It predates every single dead empire taught in modern schools. Before anyone scratched a single written word into a dry rock, humans globally shoved hot ash into their living bodies. The local weeds constantly changed. The painted rituals constantly shifted. The exact reasons evolved. But that primal urge was already ancient history, long before the very first historian existed. A bizarre poetry lives inside this brutal fact. Massive walls separate your modern reality from those primitive ghosts in the firelight. You possess advanced chemical medicine, glowing screens, and a massive, exhausting digital world. Yet ancient invisible strings tie you directly back through 100 millennia of human blood. Fire, smoke, breath. The absolute oldest humans huddled around roaring flames. They felt their chests expanding and shrinking. They smelled the exact same wood smoke you catch at a beach bonfire tonight. A few primitive minds finally noticed the chemical shift hitting their brains. They consciously made a choice. They actively passed that brutal secret down. It reached screaming Scythian nomads. It reached coughing Egyptian healers. It reached staring Mayan priests. It reached shocked European sailors. The next time you flip a light switch or smell cold winter ash, remember your biology. You are actively mirroring a primal ghost. You are simply breathing,